When I was reborn, I resolved to avoid any interaction with Ethan Jong this time. When he said he wasn't going home for the holidays, I packed my things and returned to the village by myself. When he helped Snowy Lou rent a house next door, I moved out. When he decided to stay at school and take a teaching position, I applied to a university in the Northwest. In my previous life, even my 2 children persuaded me to divorce him when I was old. They said it was so that, after my death, this ill-fated pair could be buried together in peace. As I held the university acceptance letter in my hand, I nearly burst into tears. No one knew I had been reborn. At the last moment, I had changed my choice of university to Northwest Industrial University. Even my teacher was puzzled. "Didn't you say your fiancé is staying at this school? Why would you go to such a faraway place? Can he wait for you?" When she mentioned Ethan, his tall and youthful figure flashed in my mind. To everyone, Ethan seemed out of my league. He was ambitious, handsome, and now even an officer from a military academy. And me? I only had the right to stand by his side because of a childhood engagement. I smiled brightly and replied to my teacher, "Free love is the trend now. Childhood engagements? That's just feudal nonsense." Perhaps she didn't expect such enlightenment from me. She patted my shoulder with admiration in her eyes. As I left school and walked home among the crowd, memories of my previous life flooded my mind. I hadn't even attended university back then because, in a few days, Ethan and I got married. Soon, I had children, and my education ended there. After Ethan stayed on at the school, he joined the military. From then on, we were worlds apart. Outside, his career soared. Wherever he went, Snowy Lou, from the arch troupe, followed with her daughter. Meanwhile, I was confined to our little home, serving his aging parents, raising our children. I watched my children grow up, first clinging to me, then gradually drifting closer to Ethan. Later, I didn't even know Ethan's marriage to Snowy Lou's daughter had happened until it was over. It was through an old friend's photo of the wedding tea ceremony that I saw Ethan and Snowy smiling tenderly at each other. My son even urged me to divorce Ethan more than once. He'd say, "Mom, Dad's been miserable his whole life. If it weren't for you, he and my mother-in-law would have been together already. You two don't belong together. Why can't you let him go?" Even my daughter-in-law didn't want to see me. But what could I do? I wasn't willing to let go. I couldn't accept that when Ethan's parents were bedridden, I cared for them tirelessly while he was out enjoying life with someone else. I couldn't accept that when my son was sick with a high fever in the middle of the night, I ran barefoot for miles to get him treated, while Ethan was out hosting banquets and tutoring someone else's daughter on her homework. I gave up everything for our family, yet all I got was blame for not letting go. I aged prematurely from all the hardship. But even if it killed me, I was determined to take them down with me. What happened after my death was no longer my concern. Finally, I died after yet another argument with my son about divorcing Ethan. Frustrated by my silence, he stormed out. He didn't know that as the door slammed shut, my heart gave out. I called after him, but he didn't look back. That moment, I deeply regretted having him, regretted letting my life be consumed by him. But it didn't matter anymore because I was reborn. Back to the time before I married Ethan. There was still time to change everything. When I got home, I hid my acceptance letter and began cooking dinner. The house was a 2-bedroom apartment provided by Ethan's workplace. While the food cooked, I marked my university reporting date on the calendar with a red pen. Looking at the circled date, I felt hopeful. Freedom was so close. Just as the food was ready, Ethan returned. As expected, Snowy Lou came in with her child trailing behind him. "I'm sorry to bother you again, sister-in-law," Snowy said with a smile. Her fair complexion, oval face, and bright red coat made her look captivating. Her daughter, clearly accustomed to visiting, cheered and went straight to serve herself a bowl of food from the pot. One for herself, one for Ethan, and one for Snowy. None for me. When I came out of the kitchen, the 3 of them were already sitting at the table, laughing and chatting like a family. But the moment they took a bite of the food, all 3 spat it out simultaneously. "Mommy, it's so salty." I leaned against the kitchen door frame, watching as Ethan rushed to pour soup for Snowy and her daughter. But the soup was even saltier. Snowy left in tears. saying to Ethan at the door, "Sister-in-law clearly doesn't welcome me. I won't come again." When Ethan came back, he frowned. I ignored him, went to the kitchen, and made a new dish. "You did that on purpose," Ethan said, confused but trying to explain. "Her husband sacrificed his life. He asked me to take care of them. You're a great cook. And the child likes your food." Seeing that I didn't respond, he sighed and relented. "Fine. If you don't like it, I won't invite them over anymore." The next morning, Ethan left the house. I took out my bundle, preparing to head back to the village in a couple of days. Although Ethan and I were tied by a childhood engagement, our families had exchanged keepsakes and birth charts. If we were to officially break off the engagement, it had to be done publicly with the village council present to avoid future complications. As I packed my things, I noticed the pillowcases and quilt covers I had embroidered over the years. After some thought, I stuffed them into a bag along with the new shoes I had made and other handcrafted items. At the pawn shop at the end of the street, I sold them all for 30 yuan. It wasn't much, but enough to save for college expenses like food and supplies. Back home, I marked a big X on today's calendar date. Only 20 days left. In 20 days, I would leave this place and start my new life. Ethan came home late that night. The dinner I had prepared sat untouched. "I ate at school," he said casually, but the faint scent of white tea perfume clinging to him told me otherwise. He had eaten, sure, but it was undoubtedly with Snowy and her daughter. He likely knew eating at home would upset me, so he dined with them elsewhere before coming back. Silently, I cleared the table and returned to my room. Inside were all my high school books and notes. The room was too small to fit everything. So much of it had been moved to the living room. I began bundling the books in my room with rope, planning to sort through the ones in the living room after Ethan left the next day. Since I was leaving, none of my belongings needed to remain here. As I packed, I heard a knock at the door. I knew it was Ethan. He was always respectful and would never enter my room without my permission. "What is it?" called out, unwilling to let him see me packing. There was silence outside for a moment before he said, "I've submitted the marriage report. The wedding is set for the 9th of next month. Is that okay?" The 9th of next month. The same day we had gotten married in my previous life. I glanced at the neatly packed bundle and replied flatly, "Marriage is a big deal. I'll go back and ask my family tomorrow." Another long silence followed before I finally heard his footsteps retreating. I let out a sigh of relief and leaned against the bed. With his current status, submitting a marriage report didn't require family consultation. In fact, since my parents were gone, Ethan's family had taken me in because of the engagement, and everyone already saw me as part of the Jiang family. The marriage report was merely a formality. Ethan was handsome, had a good job, and treated me well. Anyone could see I was already devoted to him. I did owe the Jiang family a debt, but I had spent an entire lifetime repaying it. I owed them nothing now. This time, I would live my own life, one without Ethan Jiang. The next morning, I was surprised to find Ethan had made breakfast, fried eggs and ate treasure porridge, my favorites. This was a rare occurrence in the 3 years I had lived here for school. I sat down silently. The only sound at the table was the occasional clink of utensils against bowls. "I'll take time off to accompany you back to the village," Ethan suddenly said, breaking the silence. I froze, then instinctively shook my head. "I'll drive you. It's not safe for you to go alone," he added, frowning slightly. I was about to find an excuse to refuse when a little girl burst through the door. "Daddy!" The child, with 2 pink butterfly bows in her hair, ran straight into Ethan's arms. "Nian Nian, what are you doing here? Where's your mom?" Ethan asked, glancing toward the door. The girl hesitated, then peeked at me cautiously. "Mom said Auntie doesn't like her, so she didn't dare come." I quietly observed this little girl, my daughter-in-law in my previous life. Though she had never once appeared before me, at just 3 years old, she was already beautiful, and in the future, her mother and she would be worshipped as deities by my son. Ethan hurriedly left with Nian Nian, saying Snowy wasn't feeling well. He didn't bother explaining further before rushing out with the child. I let out a bitter laugh. Well, this solved my problem of making excuses. I could now go back to the village alone. I took a pen and marked another big X on today's calendar date. 19 days left. I packed all my books from the room, neatly bundling my notes and papers in the living room as well. After selling them, I ended up with 13 yuan and set off for the village. Today's goal was to break off my engagement with Ethan Jiang. Although Mr. and Mrs. Liang had always treated me kindly, convincing them to agree to the annulment wouldn't be difficult. I simply needed to point out that Ethan was destined for great things and that I was no match for him. The village courtyard was quiet and somber. A small bonfire burned, surrounded by mosquitoes hovering in the warm light. I sat by the earthen wall, pressing tobacco leaves with a wooden board and slicing them finely with a hatchet. Mr. and Mrs. Liang sat silently on the doorstep. After a while, they sighed deeply and began persuading me. Aru, even if his heart is elsewhere, you're still engaged to him. If he dares not marry you, I'll make sure he regrets it. Your parents asked us to take care of you before they passed. How can you? They trailed off, exchanging glances when I remained silent. Why are you so stubborn? Fine. Let's go to the council. I followed them quietly. The village council issued a certificate to officially annul the engagement. In front of the elders, I also retrieved the keepsakes exchanged during the betrothal. Letting out a soft breath, I helped the Liangs back home. I knew they only wanted the best for me. By all logic, Ethan was now the most eligible bachelor around. Even his parents couldn't understand why I insisted on breaking things off. But I couldn't explain. I couldn't tell them about the misery of my past life. How even my only son had ended up being Snowy's child, handed over to their family while I lived a lonely, desolate life. The engagement was successfully annulled. Mrs. Liang said, "From now on, you're like our own daughter." I hadn't mentioned to anyone that I was planning to attend university in the Northwest. Instead, I stayed home with the Liang family for half a month. When it was time to leave, Mr. Liang walked me all the way to the village entrance. They kept reminding me that I should always consider their home my own, and to come back and visit often. When I reached the town to buy my bus ticket, I found they had slipped 200 yuan into my bag. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. When I returned home, the first thing I did was mark 15 large red X's on the calendar. Only 4 days left. Just 4 days until I could leave this place and start anew. As I carried my luggage to my room, I heard the door open. Ethan had just come back from work. And as usual, Snowy and Yin Yin were with him. "You're back." Ethan sounded surprised to see me. Snowy gave me a reserved nod before turning and heading directly into my room. I frowned as I watched her casually shut the door and leave my belongings haphazardly piled in the living room. I turned to Ethan. He hesitated before explaining. "Snowy's place had a bad leak during the rain a couple of days ago, so I let her stay here temporarily. Since you weren't home and didn't have much in the room, I thought it would be fine to let her use it for now." "So, you thought it was fine to clear out my belongings and let someone else stay in my room without asking me?" I replied calmly. He paused, then tried to smooth things over. "I moved your things into my room. You can stay with me for the time being." As he spoke, he opened the door to his room and added, "By the way, where are your books? Why is there so little stuff here?" I glanced at the small bundle he had placed on the bedside table, pursed my lips, and replied indifferently, "I sold them. After the exams. I didn't see the point in keeping them." Ethan frowned. "Even after exams, books can still be useful. Why sell them?" I stayed silent. Seeing I wasn't going to respond, he changed the subject. "So, how did things go with my parents?" he asked, taking the bundle from my hands. After a brief pause, I replied, "We consulted a fortune teller, and the date doesn't seem auspicious. Let's talk about it later." This was the excuse I had agreed on with the Liang family. A temporary delay to give me time to leave before explaining everything to him. Ethan didn't seem suspicious. He simply nodded and muttered, "Looks like we'll have to pick another date." He then left the room, saying he'd make dinner and that I should rest since I had just gotten back. From the corner of my eye, I saw the marriage report he had already filled out on the desk by the window. Only the date was left blank. When I finally pulled my gaze away from the report and went to help him, I overheard voices outside. The low, steady voice of a man, the lively tone of a woman, and the sweet chatter of a child. I quietly sat back down. Truthfully, now that our engagement was annulled, it wasn't appropriate for us to continue living together, especially not in the same room. But with only 4 days left, finding a suitable rental was impossible. I decided I'd eat dinner and then set up a makeshift bed in the living room for the night. After a long day of traveling, I wanted to sleep early. But Snowy, full of energy, began practicing dance in the living room in a flowing white dress. She even brought out a mat to stretch her legs. Meanwhile, Nian Nian was running in and out of Ethan's room, occasionally bouncing on his bed as if it were a trampoline. Annoyed, I made an excuse to get some water and grabbed a basin to head outside. The cool night air hit me as I took a deep breath. Oh, Aru, you're back? Weren't you visiting Ethan's parents? Mrs. Hua, our neighbor, noticed me and grabbed her own basin to join me on the way to the well. I was gone for a few days. Just got back today, I replied. Mrs. Hua's husband worked as an accountant at the local mine. Their family lived comfortably, and she was always kind enough to bring me snacks like fried dumplings. We got along well. Mrs. Hua hesitated, looking back at my house before pulling me a few steps forward. Once we reached the well, she tapped my forehead with frustration. I can't believe how naive you are. Aru, that woman is no good. Her husband's gone, and yet she's out flaunting herself everywhere. And you, how could you let someone like that into your home? She sighed dramatically before continuing. Ethan is a catch, a man every woman would want. Letting her stay is just asking for trouble. Are you out of your mind? I let her ramble, and soon she revealed that Ethan had told everyone it was my idea to let Snowy stay. Apparently, I had felt sorry for Snowy as a widow and asked Ethan to bring her and her daughter over after the disaster. I laughed bitterly. Ethan must have been worried about gossip and used me as a shield. But with only a few days left, I didn't want to waste energy arguing with him about it. I simply smiled and said nothing. On the way back, Mrs. Hua repeatedly urged me to kick them out, saying she'd gladly help if I needed it. Despite her nosy curiosity, I knew her intentions were good. When I returned to the house, the living room was empty. I grabbed my clothes and headed to the bathroom, only to find it filled with unfamiliar women's toiletries. My usual soap and towel had been shoved into a corner near the trash bin, replaced by 2 towels and a collection of shampoo and hair accessories. Oh, Auntie, Nian Nian needs the bathroom. Can you step aside? A sudden shove nearly knocked me off balance. My head hit the doorframe with a thud. Meanwhile, Snowy Lou was already holding Nian Nian and helping her relieve herself. After finishing, Snowy glanced at me still standing in the doorway and said softly, "Sister-in-law, could you please move? You're blocking the way." Her voice was gentle, but the smugness and contempt in her eyes were unmistakable. I didn't budge. "Apologize," I said calmly. Snowy froze, clearly not expecting this response from me. But she had a good daughter. Nian Nian, who already disliked me, immediately rushed forward and gave me a hard shove, then burst into tears. "You're bad. You're mean. You're bullying my mom. You're a bad person." Ethan rushed out of his room upon hearing Nian Nian's cries. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice anxious as he scooped the sobbing child into his arms. Snowy's eyes reddened as she explained softly, "It's my fault. Nian Nian needed the bathroom urgently, and sister-in-law was inside, so I asked her to move. That's all." Ethan looked at me disapprovingly, though he said nothing in front of Snowy. Instead, he soothed Nian Nian. "Don't cry. Don't cry. How about this? Auntie will apologize to you. Okay." As Nian Nian continued to fuss, Ethan carried her back to his room, promising to get her some candy. Snowy gave me a faintly triumphant look and followed him inside. I stood silently, listening as the child's wails gradually quieted. Expressionless, I finished my shower and carefully gathered my belongings, putting them into a basin. When I returned to my room, Snowy and Nian Nian had left. A box of brightly colored candies sat on the bedside table, clearly meant for the child. Ethan paused his tidying when he saw me enter. "Let's talk," he said, his tone suggesting he wanted to reason with me. I could already guess the speech he had prepared, about understanding children, letting things go, and even apologizing. I sat down, pulled out a tissue, and dabbed at the wound on my head. Then I held up the blood-stained tissue for him to see. The sight of the red stain made Ethan choke on his words. His face turned pale, then flushed, and he looked visibly uncomfortable. "I'll sleep in the living room tonight," I said, grabbing my bedding and heading for the door. "Wait," Ethan called, grabbing my arm. "The bed is free. Why go to the living room?" He assumed I was upset about what had happened earlier and sighed, pulling me back inside. "Nyen Nyen is just a child, and Snowy didn't mean anything by it. You're an adult. Don't be petty. Guests are guests. I know you don't like Snowy, but she's had it tough. Don't make things difficult for her." "Okay." I let out a cold laugh. "So you brought her here and even told people it was my idea?" Ethan froze, opening his mouth but unable to respond. I smiled bitterly. "See? No matter how you dress it up, your intentions are clear." Out of respect for the Liangs and not wanting to ruin his career, I decided not to escalate things further. That night, Ethan ended up sleeping on a makeshift bed in the living room. The next morning, I packed my belongings early, planning to find a hotel and return later to pick up the rest. When I opened the door, I saw that Ethan had already prepared breakfast. Nyen Nyen, upon seeing me, let out a disdainful hum and moved the food closer to herself and Snowy. Ethan came out of the kitchen with a plate of fried eggs and smiled awkwardly when he noticed the situation. "Good morning. Come over. I made fried eggs." He then turned to Nyen Nyen and coaxed, "Be good. Nyen Nyen, share some with Auntie." "Okay." I ignored them all and walked out of the house. The nearest hotel was just down the street. I booked the cheapest room available, 21 yuan for 3 days, and paid the deposit. On my way back, I bought some steamed buns and fried dough sticks from a nearby breakfast stall. When I returned, I was greeted by a shocking scene. My carefully packed bundle had been opened, its contents scattered across the room. Even worse, my university acceptance letter was in Nyen Nyen's hands. She was folding it into a paper airplane at the table. My head buzzed with anger. "What are you doing?" I yelled, snatching the letter away from her. Startled, Nyen Nyen fell off the chair and began crying loudly. Her piercing cries brought Snowy rushing out of the other room. "What are you doing? Who told you to bully Nyen Nyen?" she demanded, shoving me aside as she scooped the child into her arms. I was trembling with rage as I carefully unfolded my acceptance letter. "Me? Bullying her? Do you even see what she's done? Who gave you permission to touch my things? Get out of here." Snowy stood up, holding Nyen Nyen and glaring coldly at me. "Get out? You're not even married to Ethan yet. You have no right to call the shots here." She walked to the door, then paused and smirked. "Even if you do get married, you'll never win against me." With a loud slam, the door shut behind her. Snowy's hostility always emerged when Ethan wasn't around. In the past, I had felt inferior and intimidated by her beauty and status as a star performer in the arts troupe. I used to think I could never compare. But now, having lived through it all once before, I was finally at peace. Why should I compare myself to her? In Ethan's heart, Snowy would always come first. But was Ethan the entirety of my world? I could go to college. I could contribute to my country's development. I could broaden my horizons and build a better future. This quagmire was nothing but a hindrance. After tidying up my scattered belongings, I marked another heavy red X on the calendar. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed to the hotel I had booked. When I first regained my memories after being reborn, I had considered causing a scene at Snowy Lou's workplace. She had ruined my previous life, and it felt impossible to let go of the bitterness in my heart without confronting her. But then what? As long as Ethan Jiang was still in the picture, even if Snowy lost her job, he would still support her and her daughter. For Snowy, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Her foundation was solid as long as I hesitated to repay the Liang family's kindness or to avoid ruining Ethan's reputation. Snowy would always have the upper hand. Besides, the real problem wasn't Snowy, it was the man himself. Snowy's husband had plenty of comrades, yet none of them felt the need to care for her and her daughter as excessively as Ethan did, or to act as Nyen Nyen's godfather. That said it all. At the hotel, I unpacked and quickly organized my belongings. I then pulled out a piece of stationery, preparing to leave Ethan a letter, setting aside the countless ways he had failed me after our marriage. and the entanglement with Snowy Lou that lasted a lifetime. I decided to focus only on the 3 years I had spent here in high school. During that time, he had covered my living expenses and even helped me with my studies on occasion. For that alone, I felt I owed him clarity about our situation. In the letter, I explained that I had already annulled our engagement and had been admitted to another university. I made it clear that from now on, our paths would diverge, never to cross again. Halfway through writing, I heard a knock at the door. Thinking it was the hotel staff, I opened it, only to find Ethan standing there. He looked disheveled, as if he had been running around all day. Upon seeing me, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. "Thank goodness I found you. You're okay. That's all that matters," he said. I was silent, expecting him to scold me. Instead, he added, "All right, don't be angry anymore. Come back with me." Without waiting for a response, Ethan squeezed into the room and started packing my things. I quickly pressed the half-written letter under a book, but his gaze fell on a silver bracelet in the bundle. He picked it up, his expression changing. "Why do you have this bracelet?" I froze, annoyed that I hadn't hidden it better. Earlier, when Yin Yin rummaged through my belongings, a bell from the bracelet had come loose, and I had repaired it. The bracelet was the token of our childhood engagement, and I had taken it back when I annulled the engagement. Ethan's face grew tense as he examined it. "This bracelet should be with my mother. How did it end up with you?" I scrambled for an explanation, but before I could speak, he chuckled. "I see. My mom must have given it to you to bring over for me." He put the bracelet back into the bundle. "Just keep it for now. We're getting married soon anyway. What's mine is yours. You might as well hold on to it." I exhaled in relief, but my hand stayed firmly pressed on the bundle. Ethan frowned. "Are you still upset?" Yin Yin was wrong, but she's just a child. Snowy didn't mean anything by it, either. She was so worried about you last night that she went out looking for you alone. She even hurt her knee and is resting at home now. He paused, then continued. "Honestly, I don't understand why Yin Yin always behaves well, but the moment you're around, there's conflict." Ethan seemed ready to keep lecturing, but I stared at him with a calm expression, cutting him off. "You know," I said with a faint smile, "this afternoon your daughter rifled through my things. I told her to stop, and do you know what your Snowy said? She told me I had no right to speak to her daughter that way. She even said that, even if I married you, I'd never win against her." Ethan's face stiffened, his complexion shifting between pale and flushed. "What? My daughter? She's my goddaughter," he said, trying to clarify. Ignoring him, I continued. "You keep using the excuse of caring for a fallen comrade's family to justify being close to her. But if your late comrade knew this was how you cared for his wife, do you think he'd rest easy in his grave?" My sharp words pierced through Ethan's self-deceptions, and his face darkened. He staggered slightly, as if physically struck. After a long pause, he said hoarsely, "Fine. If you're not coming back, stay here and think it over. I'll come back for you in a few days." Then he turned and left in a hurry, almost stumbling in his retreat. "I've never thought of abandoning you," he muttered as he left. "I'll go file the marriage report when I return." I shut the door behind him, my face emotionless. How laughable. To him, filing a marriage report was some grand favor, a blessing I should be eternally grateful for. The next day, I went to my teacher to collect my train ticket. She had gone out of her way to use her connections to ensure I had a seat. She even gave me the names of acquaintances in the Northwest who could offer some support if needed. I shared lunch with her, then spent the afternoon buying local specialties as gifts for my future roommates at university. On my last night at the hotel, I lay in bed early. I thought I'd toss and turn, overwhelmed with emotions or restless thoughts. Surprisingly, I fell asleep quickly. The next morning, I left my letter at the hotel front desk, checked out, and headed to the train station with my luggage. The 2-day train ride was long and bumpy, but I managed to doze off here and there. When I finally arrived at the university, I felt a wave of relief. After completing the registration process, I plunged straight into my studies. Unlike my previous life, where I never set foot on a college campus, this time I cherished every moment. Apart from eating and sleeping, I spent all my time either in class or at the library. 3 months into the semester, I received Ethan's first letter. I wasn't surprised he had tracked me down. A month earlier, my teacher had written to tell me that Ethan had visited her and learned where I had gone. His letter declared that he did not agree to the annulment and insisted that I had always been his wife in his heart. He claimed there was nothing between him and Snowy and assured me that he had already sent her away and would never see her again. He wrote that he was waiting for me to return. Enclosed with the letter was 100 yuan. I tucked the letter away without replying, leaving the money untouched. College life was busy, and I had no time for distractions. I originally planned to find a part-time job. Although my grades were excellent and I had received a scholarship, my monthly living expenses were still a heavy burden. When my teacher learned of my plan, she scolded me and began sending me 50 yuan every month. In her letter, she explicitly stated that this was a loan, not a gift. At the end of the letter, she playfully added, "Don't worry, your teacher's wife knows and fully supports this." For some reason, tears suddenly streamed down my face. In my past life, no matter how much pain or regret I endured, I had never cried. I had been consumed by hatred and despair but never allowed myself to shed tears. Yet now, they flowed freely, as if some long-held dam had finally burst. I cried so hard that even my roommates were startled and rushed to comfort me. After that cathartic release, I threw myself into my studies with even greater determination. Ethan's letters arrived monthly, each accompanied by 100 yuan. In the final month of the semester, one of his letters stated, "I know you won't want to come back, but wait for me. I'll come to spend the new year with you." But Ethan never came, and the letters suddenly stopped. Later, my teacher informed me of the reason. Ethan had married Snowy Lou. The teacher's letter explained that it had caused quite a stir. Ethan had originally applied for a transfer to be near me, but someone accused him of inappropriate relationships. Since I had already left and there was no victim to verify the claims, the matter was swept under the rug. However, Snowy lost her job as a result of the scandal, and Ethan had no choice but to marry her. The teacher concluded with a heartfelt remark, "I feel an immense sense of relief for you. You're fortunate to have escaped." And I knew she was right. In this life, I was indeed lucky. I had been given the chance to rewrite my future, to steer clear of the quagmire of my past. A year later, I received another letter from Ethan. The first sentence read, "I'm sorry." He explained that the person who had reported him was actually Snowy herself. When she discovered Ethan's transfer application, she begged him to stay. When he refused, she took drastic measures, betting on her gamble, and winning. Ethan admitted that only later did he realize the significance of the dates I had marked on the calendar in our shared apartment. For the longest time, he had thought those marks represented my anticipation of marrying him. I smiled faintly and burned all his letters. As for the money he sent, I returned it to my teacher, asking her to forward it elsewhere. 2 years later, before I even graduated, I joined the National 201 project, dedicating my life to my country's development. I no longer looked back. Understand Ethan's side story. The night I heard Aru's sharp words at the hotel, I was overwhelmed with shock and anger. When I returned home, I locked myself in my room for 3 days, consumed by turmoil. I knew I had made mistakes. While waiting for Aru to grow up, my heart had strayed. In my repeated efforts to help Snowy Lou, I had allowed myself to overlook the fact that I already had a fiancé. Snowy's gentle demeanor and Nian Nian's cheerful innocence had led me to actions that now filled me with shame. After 3 days, I realized with painful clarity that I couldn't live without Aru. I rushed back to the hotel, only to find that I was too late. She was gone. She had left me behind. I asked everyone I could think of, but no one knew where she had gone. Eventually, her teacher informed me that she had gone to the northwest. The news was staggering. I thought of the silver bracelet in her bundle, a token of our engagement. I hurried home, only to discover that she had formally annulled our engagement. I returned to the apartment we had shared for 3 years, despondent. That night, I drank heavily, and Snowy somehow slipped into the room. When she found my transfer application, she caused an uproar. In the aftermath, she lost her job, and her family confronted me angrily. I had no choice but to marry her. But after the marriage, my friends began distancing themselves from me. I wrote letters to Aru, but she never replied. It was as if she had vanished entirely from my world. Snowy kept a tight watch on me after our wedding. She often caused scenes, and my parents disliked her, constantly comparing her to Aru. Over time, Snowy became hysterical and paranoid. Opportunities for transfer arose several times, but Snowy always sabotaged them. Each time, she accused me of wanting to leave her to reunite with my former fiancé. I could only smile bitterly in silence. Aru would probably feel disgusted to see me now. As the years passed, I watched my peers rise through the ranks while I remained stagnant. Snowy began to mock me, calling me a failure. She wanted another child, but no matter how hard we tried, it didn't happen. In the end, we only had Nian Nian. When Nian Nian grew up, she married and had children, but her husband was a violent gambler who cheated on her. Snowy cried daily over their struggles, yet she adamantly opposed Nian Nian's divorce. Whenever Nian Nian argued with her husband, Snowy would vent her frustrations on me, blaming me for everything. "You're useless," she'd scream. "Why did I ever marry you?" Even Nian Nian resented me, saying, "If you had a higher position, he wouldn't dare treat me this way." I had no response. Eventually, Nian Nian ran away after another failed attempt to divorce her husband, only to be dragged back and beaten severely. By then, I was too old and powerless to help her. Not long after, Nian Nian took her own life, leaving behind a 6-year-old child. I never imagined that in my old age, I would lose my daughter and be left to raise her child. Looking at Nian Nian's child, I could only wonder what had gone so terribly wrong. I slowly recalled that year. It seemed there had once been a young figure by my side, someone whose heart and soul were completely devoted to me. I often couldn't help but wonder, if I hadn't gotten involved with Snowy Lou back then, if I had married Aru instead, would things have turned out differently? But when had I lost her? I couldn't even remember anymore. Looking back on my life, I realized how utterly meaningless it had been.